The night before his regiment received its orders to move inland toward the front lines, a 20-year-old British soldier named Edward Okafor sat on the low wall outside a compound house in the Yaba district of Lagos and tried to write a letter he did not know how to begin. His hands were steady. They had always been steady. His mother's hands, she used to say. But the words would not come in any order that felt adequate to what he needed them to carry. He had known Amara Egze for 11 days. That was all. 11 days in which the war had briefly paused around the two of them, like water parting around a stone. She was the daughter of the compound owner, 20 years old herself, with the particular composure of someone who had already survived years of colonial disruption and learned to measure hope very carefully. On the evening of October 12th, Edward's regiment received orders to move out before midnight. There was no time for a formal farewell. He pressed into Amara's hand a single item, a photograph of himself, taken outside the barracks at Apapa Wharf, his name and a London return address written on the reverse in pencil. She gave him a small carved bronze medal of Ori Olokun, the Yoruba deity of the deep waters and safe passage, which had belonged to her grandmother. They held hands in the dark courtyard of the compound for 4 minutes. Then the lorries came, and the world resumed its war, and he was gone. She watched the convoy disappear down the lane. She stood there long after the sound of the engines had faded. The medal was in his pocket. The photograph was in hers. The war went on for 2 more years, and when it finally ended, everything that had existed before it seemed to exist in a different country of time entirely. Edward wrote to the compound address 3 times during the following months. None of his letters arrived. He did not know, could not have known, that the compound had been commandeered during a period of civil unrest, but the Eze family had relocated to Enugu, and that the address he had written from memory, in the dark, in pencil, was missing 1 digit.
Edward returned to Peckham, London, in the autumn of 1945 and entered the particular silence that the war's survivors brought home with them. The silence that filled the space where things had happened that could not be explained to anyone who had not been there. His family greeted him with a party, a tin of Ovaltine, and careful questions about when he planned to settle down. He smiled and answered, and said very little that was true. He kept the bronze medal of Ori Olokun in a small wooden box in his bedside drawer for the rest of his life. His wife Grace, whom he married in 1950 and loved genuinely and well for 43 years until her death in 1993, knew the medal was there. She never asked about it. He was grateful for her intelligence, in that particular way that long-married people are grateful for the spaces the other person knows not to fill. In Enugu, Amara Eze rebuilt her life with the efficient practicality of someone who has learned that waiting is a form of paralysis. She married a kind civil servant named Chukwuemeka Obi in 1948. She raised 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter. She taught secondary school literature for 31 years at the Queen's School, Enugu. She was, by every observable measure, happy. The considered, constructed happiness of someone who has made a deliberate peace with the irretrievable, but she kept the photograph. In 44 years of marriage to Chukwuemeka, who died in 1992, she kept it in a book. The same book, a worn copy of Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, on the highest shelf of her study. Chukwuemeka had seen it once, early in their marriage, and said nothing. She loved him more for that nothing than for almost anything else.
Neither Edward nor Amara ever searched for the other, not formally. This is the part of the story that is hardest to explain to people who grew up with the internet, the particular resignation of that era, the way loss could be total and permanent simply because the machinery of connection did not yet exist to overcome it. Amara's youngest daughter, Ngozi, clearing a bookshelf during a visit, pulled out Things Fall Apart, and the photograph fell to the floor. 5 years after photographing the photograph, Ngozi Obi, now 52, a secondary school administrator in Abuja, someone who had grown up in the pre-internet world but navigated the digital one fluently, finally did what she had been afraid to do. She searched for Edward Okafor.
The search took 3 weeks and led her down a branching series of digital corridors that felt, she would later say, exactly like the mystery novels she had grown up reading. There were several Edward Okafors in the United Kingdom. One had died in 1978. One was 38 years old. The third, an Edward James Okafor, born 1923, last known address in Peckham, London, had a son named Michael Okafor, who ran a construction firm in Lewisham, and whose Facebook profile was public.
She wrote carefully in English, explaining who she was and what she had found, and that she was not certain this was the right family, but that the name, the date, and the detail of a compound house in Yarber in October 1943 suggested it might be. She attached the photograph of the photograph. She pressed send, and then sat very still at her kitchen table in Abuja for a long time. Michael Okafor received the email on a Tuesday morning. He read it 3 times. Then he went to his father's flat in the sheltered housing complex in Lewisham, where Edward, now 95, still lived independently. Michael did not tell his father immediately. He needed to understand what he was looking at first. He drove home, opened the email again, and stared at the image of the old photograph. A young soldier outside the barracks at a Papa Wharf, a London address on the back, a name in pencil. His father's handwriting. His father's face, 70 years younger,
looking directly at a camera. When Michael finally showed Edward the email the following Sunday, his father was quiet for so long that Michael began to worry. Then Edward reached out slowly and took Michael's phone and held it very close to his face. He looked at the image of the photograph for nearly 2 full minutes. When he finally spoke, his voice was entirely steady. He said, "She kept it." He said nothing else. He handed the phone back and turned to look out the window. Michael watched his 95-year-old father's hands, which had always been so still, begin, very slightly, to shake.